My name is Grace. I'm 22, and I thought I'd finally achieved the financial independence I'd worked toward since I was 16. 3 jobs while maintaining my scholarship, careful budgeting, and dedicated saving had built my college fund dollar by dollar. Then came that Friday morning when I checked my account balance. Everything gone. Mom had drained it all, but that was just the beginning. Now she's sending me my sister's bills too. If you're watching this right now, let me know where you're from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to see how I finally stood up against financial manipulation that nearly cost me everything. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where most families were middle class. My childhood was relatively normal until I turned 14. That was when my parents decided to divorce, leaving me and my younger sister Amber, who was 10 at the time, caught in the emotional crossfire. The divorce wasn't particularly nasty compared to others, but it created a financial strain that would shape our family dynamics for years to come. My mother, Diana, had been a stay-at-home mom for most of my childhood. She had briefly worked as a dental receptionist before Amber was born, but never returned to the workforce. The divorce meant she suddenly needed to support herself and 2 children, a responsibility she wasn't prepared for. She quickly found work at a local insurance office, but her salary wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle we had when my parents were together. My father, James, paid his court-mandated child support on time for the most part, but as the years passed, his involvement in our lives gradually diminished. He remarried when I was 16 and started a new family in Chicago. His visits became less frequent, birthday calls shorter, and his interest in our day-to-day lives seemed to fade. The child support checks still came, but they were sometimes late, and he was increasingly difficult to reach when Mom needed to discuss expenses. The real financial education in my life came from my grandfather, my mother's father. He was a retired accountant who had always been careful with money. When I was growing up, he would give me books about saving and investing instead of toys for birthdays. At first, I found these gifts boring, but as I witnessed my mother's financial struggles after the divorce, I began to appreciate his wisdom. When I turned 15, Grandpa helped me open my first savings account. He matched every dollar I saved from babysitting and lawn mowing jobs, teaching me the power of consistent saving. By 16, I was working part-time at a local grocery store after school and on weekends. While my friends spent their earnings on clothes and concerts, I put most of mine into savings with a clear goal in mind: financial independence and college. As time went on, I noticed troubling patterns in my mother's financial behavior. She would make impulsive purchases, buying expensive clothes or electronics we didn't need, then panic when bills came due. Several times she borrowed money from me with promises to pay it back when she got paid, but those repayments rarely materialized in full. She'd return $20 of the 50 she borrowed or claim she had covered one of my expenses instead of returning cash. These experiences strengthened my determination to be financially independent, unlike my mother. I watched how money troubles affected her sleep, her mood, and her relationships. She would argue with my grandparents when they questioned her spending decisions and snap at Amber and me when we needed money for school activities. I promised myself I would never end up in that position. Throughout high school, my focus on financial stability intensified. I maintained excellent grades to qualify for scholarships while working nearly 20 hours a week. My social life suffered somewhat, but I had a few close friends who understood my goals. By senior year, I had saved nearly $10,000 and secured a partial scholarship to Michigan State University. Despite my growing independence, I still maintained some financial ties with my mother. When I opened my adult bank accounts at 18, I allowed her to remain as a co-signer, just in case. My grandfather advised against this, but I didn't want to hurt my mother's feelings. She had been supportive of my academic goals, even if her financial support was limited. Plus, I reasoned there might be emergencies where having her on the account could be helpful if I was unreachable. This decision, made out of trust and a desire to preserve our relationship, would later come back to haunt me in ways I could never have imagined. By the time I graduated high school, my mother's financial habits hadn't improved, but I was hopeful that my example might inspire change. Amber was showing signs of following in my footsteps, rather than our mothers getting a part-time job at 16 and asking me for budgeting advice. I felt proud of this influence, not realizing that my mother might view my financial success as a resource rather than an example. The summer before college, Mom suggested I transfer my savings to a new account that offered better interest rates. She had researched options and found one that would help my money grow faster. Appreciative of her apparent support, I agreed, not recognizing this as the first step in a pattern of increasing interest in my finances. Looking back now, I can see the red flags that my trust and inexperience caused me to miss. College was everything I had hoped for and worked toward. Michigan State's campus became my new home, and I quickly adapted to university life. My partial scholarship covered about half of my tuition, and I was determined to avoid student loans if possible. This meant continuing to work while maintaining the grades needed to keep my scholarship. During my freshman year, I secured a position at the campus library that worked perfectly with my class schedule. By sophomore year, I had added tutoring in mathematics and weekend shifts at a coffee shop near campus. Between these three jobs, I managed to cover my living expenses and contribute to my tuition payments, all while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. What made this juggling act possible was my meticulous system for budgeting and saving. I created detailed spreadsheets tracking every dollar earned and spent. I used 3 different banking apps to categorize my money, one for everyday expenses, one for tuition savings, and one for emergency funds. My friends would tease me about my financial apps and spreadsheets, but they also came to me for advice when they faced money problems. During my sophomore year, I met Tyler in my economics class. He was working his way through college too, though with more family support than I had. He respected my independence and shared many of my financial values. We started dating, and he became another positive influence in my life, encouraging my goals while also reminding me to occasionally spend a little on experiences that mattered. By the spring of my junior year, I had accumulated a substantial college fund of over $18,000. This money represented countless early mornings at the coffee shop, late nights at the library, and weekends spent tutoring instead of going to parties. It was earmarked specifically for my senior year tuition and expenses, when I planned to reduce my work hours to focus on internships that would launch my career. My financial plans were detailed and specific. I had calculated exactly how much I needed for my final 3 semesters, including a small buffer for unexpected expenses. I had researched internship opportunities in financial analysis, my chosen field, and identified companies in the area that offered paid positions. Everything was falling into place according to my careful planning. Throughout this time, my phone calls with my mother became increasingly focused on her money problems. She would call to catch up, but the conversation would inevitably turn to her struggling to pay the electric bill or needing car repairs she couldn't afford. I would offer advice about budgeting or suggestions for increasing her income, but she seemed more interested in hearing about my savings than implementing changes herself. Amber graduated high school during my sophomore year of college. Mom threw an extravagant graduation party that she clearly couldn't afford. When I questioned the expense, she assured me she had received a bonus at work. I later learned from Amber that Mom had maxed out a credit card to pay for the event. This worried me, but I was too busy with my own life to investigate further. Amber decided to take a gap year before college to work and save money following my example. She moved in with our grandparents to save on rent and found a full-time job at a local retail store. I was proud of her prudent approach and spoke with her regularly, offering the financial guidance our mother couldn't provide. About midway through my junior year, I began noticing strange patterns in my conversations with Mom. She would ask unusually detailed questions about my accounts, wanting to know which banks I used, what my balances were, and whether I had changed any passwords recently. At the time, I attributed this to her growing interest in managing her own finances better, perhaps finally taking my advice. I freely shared information, never suspecting her motives were anything but supportive. Then came the first real red flag that I regrettably dismissed. I noticed small unexplained withdrawals from my everyday expenses account, usually under $50. When I mentioned these to my mother, she quickly suggested they must be bank errors or fees I hadn't noticed before. She offered to call the bank with me to sort it out, but then created emergencies or excuses to postpone these calls. Eventually, the small withdrawals stopped and caught up in finals and work. I let the matter drop. This would prove to be a costly oversight. During this time, I also noticed my mother making odd comments about my financial independence. "You're so lucky to have everything figured out," she would say, or, "I wish I had your advantages when I was your age." These comments confused me, as I had worked incredibly hard for everything I had often, with minimal support from her. There was a strange undertone of resentment that I couldn't quite understand, but I chalked it up to her frustration with her own situation. As summer approached, I secured an unpaid internship at a local financial firm. It was a prestigious opportunity that would look excellent on my resume, but it meant I would have less income during those months. I had planned for this setting aside enough to cover my summer expenses. Mom seemed unusually interested in this change to my financial situation, asking repeatedly how I would manage and whether I would need to dip into my main savings. Looking back, she was assessing how closely I monitored my accounts. What I didn't know then was that while I was building my future with disciplined saving and careful planning, my mother was laying the groundwork for an act of betrayal that would shake not just my financial foundation, but my entire sense of trust and family. The discovery came on a Thursday morning in late July, just weeks before my senior year was set to begin. I had logged into my bank account to transfer my tuition payment for the fall semester, a routine transaction I had performed several times before. What I saw on my screen made my heart stop. My college fund, which should have contained over $18,000, showed a balance of just $742.16. At first, I thought there must be some mistake, a technical glitch with the website. I logged out and back in, but the numbers remained the same. My hands shaking, I checked my other accounts. My everyday expenses account, which had contained about $2,000, now showed less than $300. Only my emergency fund held at a different bank remained untouched. I immediately called the bank's customer service line. The representative confirmed what I was seeing on my screen. There had been multiple large withdrawals from both accounts over the past 3 weeks. When I asked for details about these transactions, what she told me made the room spin around me. All withdrawals had been made in person at various branch locations by Diana Turner, my mother, who was a co-signer on the accounts. The largest withdrawal had been $14,000 from my college fund, taken out just 2 days earlier. There had been several smaller withdrawals before that, as if she was testing whether I would notice. The representative expressed sympathy, but explained that since my mother was a legal co-signer on the accounts, the bank had no reason to prevent her from making withdrawals. In the eyes of the bank, she had every right to access those funds. After hanging up with the bank, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process what had happened. Then I called my mother. The conversation that followed is burned into my memory forever. "Mom, did you withdraw money from my accounts?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was a long pause before she answered. "Grace, honey, I was going to tell you. There was a family emergency. I needed the money temporarily." $14,000, plus all the other withdrawals. That's almost all the money I had saved for my final year of college. My voice rose with each word. "I know it seems like a lot," she said, her tone defensive now. "But you have that scholarship and you can get loans like everyone else. This was an emergency, Grace. You know I wouldn't have taken it otherwise." "What emergency?" I demanded. "Is Amber okay? Are you sick?" Another pause. "It's complicated. There were some debts that needed to be paid immediately. I was at risk of losing the house." But something in her voice told me she wasn't being truthful. "When were you going to tell me? When were you planning to pay it back?" "Of course I'll pay you back," she said quickly. "As soon as I get back on my feet. You know I'm good for it." But she had never been good for it in the past. The small loans she had taken over the years had rarely been repaid in full, and now she had taken nearly everything I had. "I need that money now, Mom. My tuition is due in 2 weeks." "You'll figure it out, Grace. You always do. You're so smart with money. Maybe you can work more hours or ask your grandfather for help." The conversation continued in this vein, with my mother alternating between defensive justifications and vague promises to repay the money soon. By the end of the call, it was clear to me that I would not be seeing that money again, certainly not in time for my tuition payment. After hanging up, I broke down completely. Years of careful saving and sacrifice gone in an instant. My entire plan for senior year was now in jeopardy. I might not be able to graduate on time or at all. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial loss. My own mother had stolen from me knowing exactly what that money was for and how hard I had worked for it. Tyler came over as soon as I called him, finding me curled up on my bed, still in shock. My roommate Sarah returned from her summer job and joined him in trying to comfort me. They helped me make a list of immediate actions to take, people to call, options to explore. Their support was the only thing that kept me from complete despair that night. The next morning, I had an emergency meeting with the financial aid office at the university. The advisor listened sympathetically to my situation, but explained that most scholarship and grant deadlines for the upcoming academic year had already passed. She helped me fill out a late application for emergency aid and provided information about student loans, which I had desperately hoped to avoid. Walking back to my apartment from that meeting, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The shock was giving way to anger, not just at my mother but at myself. How could I have been so naive? Why had I ignored the warning signs? Why had I left her as a co-signer on my accounts, despite my grandfather's advice? The financial responsibility I had prided myself on now seemed like a joke. I had failed to protect myself from the most obvious threat to my security. But beneath the anger and self-recrimination was a deeper pain. My mother, the person who should have been protecting and supporting me, had deliberately undermined my future. She had watched me work 3 jobs, sacrifice social experiences, and carefully save every dollar, all the while planning to take that money for herself. The betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept running calculations in my head, trying to figure out how I could possibly make up for such a massive financial loss in just a few weeks. The numbers never added up. Without that money, my carefully constructed path to graduation now seemed blocked by an insurmountable obstacle. The financial independence I had worked so hard to achieve had been ripped away in an instant, leaving me more vulnerable than I had ever been before. The weeks that followed the discovery were a desperate scramble to salvage what I could of my financial situation and my academic future. I picked up every extra shift possible at both the library and coffee shop, often working from opening until closing. I took on additional tutoring students, meeting them between classes, and on my lunch breaks. Despite these efforts, the money coming in was nowhere near what I needed to replace what had been taken. 4 days after discovering the theft, I met with a representative at the bank. She was sympathetic, but confirmed what the phone representative had told me. Because my mother was a co-signer on the accounts, the withdrawals were legally authorized. My options were limited. I could file a police report for theft, but since the accounts were jointly held, it would be difficult to prove criminal intent. She advised me to open new accounts immediately without my mother as a co-signer and transfer any remaining funds. I followed her advice, opening accounts at a different bank entirely. I also placed a freeze on my credit report, a precautionary measure the bank representative had suggested. This turned out to be an important step, though I didn't realize it at the time. My grandfather was furious when I finally gathered the courage to tell him what had happened. He had warned me about keeping my mother on my accounts, but even he hadn't imagined she would go this far. He offered to help with some of my expenses, but at 83 and on a fixed income, his resources were limited. Still, his moral support meant everything to me during this time. Meanwhile, my mother's behavior worsened rather than improved. She began avoiding my calls, responding only to texts, and with increasingly absurd excuses about why she couldn't talk. When I did manage to reach her, she would minimize the impact of what she had done, saying things like, "It's just money, Grace. Your education isn't going to suffer." When I pressed her about repayment, she would promise to start sending what she could soon, but no money ever appeared. About 2 weeks after the initial discovery, my sister Amber called me upset and confused. She had just seen Mom pull into the driveway in a brand new SUV. When Amber asked about it, Mom claimed it was a great deal she couldn't pass up. Amber, knowing about my situation, immediately called to tell me. The knowledge that my college fund had likely financed this new vehicle made me physically ill. Later that same week, I saw posts on my mother's social media showing her on a weekend trip to a lakeside resort with her new boyfriend. The carefree smiles in those photos posted while I was working double shifts and applying for emergency loans cut through me like a knife. Then came a new shock. I received an envelope in the mail containing several bills in my name that I had never authorized. There was a cell phone bill for a line I didn't recognize, a credit card statement for purchases I hadn't made, and an overdue notice from a department store credit account I never opened. Alarmed, I immediately requested my full credit report. What I found there sent me into another tailspin. There were multiple credit accounts opened in my name over the past year, all carrying balances. The addresses on these accounts were variations of my mother's address, with slight changes to apartment numbers or street spellings that had allowed them to pass verification. This discovery elevated the situation from a personal betrayal to clear identity theft. My mother hadn't just taken the money I had saved. She had been systematically using my good credit to open fraudulent accounts. The total debt in my name was over $12,000, in addition to the $18,000 she had taken from my accounts. I remember the moment this reality fully hit me. I was at work serving a customer at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed with an email confirmation of my credit report. I excused myself to the back room, read through the list of accounts, and had my first ever panic attack. My coworker found me gasping for breath, unable to speak, tears streaming down my face. The manager sent me home concerned for my health. The financial damage was now well over $30,000, a staggering amount that I had no way of repaying while still in school. The sense of violation and betrayal reached a new depth. This wasn't a one-time desperate act by my mother. It was a calculated, ongoing scheme that had been operating right under my nose while I trusted her. That night, I sat with Tyler and Sarah in our apartment living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Tyler, whose father was an attorney, suggested I needed to take legal action immediately. Sarah, who had experienced financial abuse from a former partner, emphasized the importance of protecting myself first before worrying about family relationships. "Your mom isn't just borrowing money anymore, Grace," Sarah said gently. "This is identity theft. It's a crime, and it's going to follow you for years if you don't address it now." The weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just about the money anymore. My mother's actions were threatening my financial future in ways that could take years to recover from. The credit damage alone could affect my ability to rent an apartment, buy a car, or even get certain jobs after graduation. The magnitude of the betrayal was still difficult to comprehend, but the practical implications were becoming clearer by the day, and they were devastating. As I tried to sleep that night, my phone chimed with a text from my mother, the first communication I had received from her in days. It read simply, "Don't worry so much about the money. Family takes care of family. I took care of you for 18 years, now it's your turn to help out." That text, so dismissive of the damage she had caused, and so entitled in its expectation of my continued support despite her betrayal, marked a turning point. I realized then that this situation would not resolve itself. My mother was not going to suddenly recognize the harm she had caused or make meaningful efforts to make amends. If I wanted to protect myself and my future, I would need to take action, even if that meant formally accusing my own mother of theft and fraud. The next morning, I scheduled appointments with campus legal services, the police department, and a credit counseling agency. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of agency returning. I could not control what my mother had done, but I could control how I responded to it, and I was done being a victim. The fall semester began with me in the worst academic position of my life. The stress and extra work hours took an immediate toll on my performance. For the first time, I was missing assignment deadlines and performing poorly on quizzes. My focus was shattered, my sleep irregular, and my anxiety constant. Professors who had previously praised my work now expressed concern about my sudden decline. By midterms, my grades had dropped dramatically. I received my first C on a major economics paper, a subject I usually excelled in. My academic advisor called me in for a meeting after receiving alerts from two professors. She warned me that if my grades didn't improve, I might lose my scholarship, which required maintaining a 3.5 GPA. The irony was crushing. I was working more hours than ever to make up for the stolen money, which was causing me to perform poorly, which might cost me my scholarship, creating an even larger financial hole. The precarious financial situation also threatened my graduation timeline. I had been forced to reduce my course load for the semester from 18 credits to 12, the minimum, to maintain full-time status. This meant I would need to take extra classes in my final semester, or extend into a fifth year, neither of which I could afford. The carefully planned academic roadmap I had followed for 3 years was now in shambles. Tyler had been incredibly supportive throughout this crisis, offering emotional support and practical help wherever he could. About a month into the semester, he suggested I move in with him to save on rent. His apartment was smaller than mine, but significantly cheaper, and he offered to cover the majority of the living expenses until I got back on my feet. While the offer was generous, it created an unexpected tension in our relationship. I had always valued my independence, financial and otherwise. Moving in with Tyler out of necessity rather than choice felt like another loss of control. We had several arguments about it with him, insisting it was a practical solution, and me worried about becoming financially dependent on someone else after what had happened with my mother. Eventually, my dwindling bank account made the decision for me, and I reluctantly agreed to move in at the end of the month. As if the financial and academic stress weren't enough, my mother began sending me Amber's bills. My sister was now taking classes at the local community college while living with our grandparents, and apparently, our mother had promised to cover certain expenses. Instead of fulfilling that promise, she forwarded the bills to me with notes like, "Amber needs these books for her classes. I know you want to support her education." These manipulative attempts to shift financial responsibility to me were infuriating, especially knowing that my mother had recently purchased a new car and taken vacations. I called Amber immediately to explain the situation. She was horrified and assured me she had never asked our mother to send me her bills. This conversation brought us closer as we realized we were both victims of our mother's financial manipulation, albeit in different ways. Then came the breaking point. I received a formal notice in the mail about a debt collection action for a personal loan of $8,000 that I had supposedly taken out 6 months earlier. The loan was in my name with my social security number, but I had never applied for or received this money. When I called the loan company to dispute the debt, they sent me copies of the application documents. The signature on the forms was a close approximation of mine, clearly forged by someone who had access to my legitimate signatures, likely my mother. The loan funds had been deposited into an account I didn't recognize, presumably one she had created using my information. That same evening, my mother called me for the first time in weeks. I let it go to voicemail, still too angry to speak with her directly. The message she left changed everything. "Grace, I know you're upset about the money, but you need to get over it," she said, her voice casual, as if discussing a minor disagreement. "Listen, Amber got accepted to transfer to Michigan State for next semester, and the deposit and housing fee are due next week. It's about $3,000 total. I told her you'd cover it since you're already there and doing so well. It's your turn to help family out just like I helped you all those years. Call me back so we can discuss how you'll send the money." I played this message for Tyler, who stared at me in disbelief. "She stole your college fund, maxed out credit cards in your name, forged your signature on a loan application, and now she expects you to pay for Amber's college expenses?" he asked incredulously. "Grace, this is beyond financial abuse. She's living in a completely different reality." That night I couldn't sleep, eat, or focus on anything. The audacity of my mother's request, coming after everything she had already done, sent me into a complete emotional collapse. For the first time, I began experiencing symptoms of what my doctor would later identify as depression and anxiety. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't motivate myself to go to work or class, and felt a constant sense of doom hanging over me. Tyler convinced me to see a counselor at the campus health center, who recommended I take a short medical leave from both school and work. The thought of stepping back from my responsibilities terrified me, but I was at a breaking point. Something had to give, or I would completely shatter. As I sat in the health center waiting room scrolling through my phone to distract myself, I received a text from my grandfather asking how I was doing. In that moment, overwhelmed and desperate, I made a decision that would change everything. I typed out a detailed response explaining exactly what my mother had done and the dire situation I now found myself in. I had been protecting her, minimizing the extent of her actions, when speaking to family members out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. That ended that day. It was time for the truth to come out, and for me to seek the help I desperately needed. The morning after my breakdown, I met with an advisor from campus legal services. She listened to my story with increasing concern, taking detailed notes, and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished explaining everything from the drained accounts to the identity theft to the most recent demand for Amber's college expenses, she looked at me seriously. "Grace, what your mother has done constitutes several criminal offenses," she said. "The bank withdrawals might be legally ambiguous since she was a co-signer, but the identity theft, credit fraud, and forgery are clear criminal actions. You have every right to report these crimes regardless of your relationship with the perpetrator." She helped me organize my documentation and prepare for filing a police report, which we did that same afternoon. The officer who took my report was professional but compassionate, recognizing how difficult it was for me to formally accuse my own mother of these crimes. He explained that an investigation would be opened and that I should be prepared for the possibility that it could lead to criminal charges. That evening, my grandfather called. He had received my text and was both heartbroken and furious. He insisted on coming to campus the next day, despite the 3-hour drive from his home. When he arrived, he hugged me tightly and then sat me down for a serious conversation. "Your mother needs to face the consequences of her actions," he said firmly. "I've enabled her financial irresponsibility for too long, and I won't stand by while she destroys your future too. I'm going to arrange a meeting with all of us present. It's time for the truth to come out." When 2 days later, we met at a neutral location, a private room at the local library. My grandfather, my sister Amber, my mother, and I sat around a table with my grandfather, insisting that I record the conversation for my protection. My mother looked nervous but defiant as we entered, her arms crossed defensively. "Diana," my grandfather began using my mother's first name, which he only did when extremely serious. "We're here because your actions have caused tremendous harm to Grace, and potentially to Amber as well. Before you say anything, you need to know that Grace has filed a police report and has documentation of everything. The only reason we're having this conversation instead of letting the police handle it directly is because, despite everything, she still cares about what happens to you." My mother's defiance crumbled almost immediately. She began crying at first, trying to minimize or justify her actions. But as my grandfather methodically laid out the evidence, her excuses gave way to a confession. Between sobs, she revealed that she had developed a gambling problem over the past 2 years. What had started as occasional visits to a casino with friends had escalated into an addiction that consumed her finances. She had maxed out her own credit cards and taken out payday loans before turning to my accounts. The new car, she admitted, was leased under false pretenses about her income, and the vacations had been paid for by her boyfriend, who had no idea about her financial situation. The most shocking revelation came when she admitted to having a gambling debt of over $40,000 to people who had begun making threats. Much of my stolen money had gone to these debts, not to household expenses, as she had claimed. Amber listened in shocked silence, occasionally wiping away tears. This was the first time she was hearing the full extent of our mother's deception, including the attempts to make me pay for her college expenses without her knowledge. While my mother's tearful confession and apparent remorse were affecting, I remained wary. She had lied convincingly before, and I needed more than words to believe in her genuine intention to make amends. I laid out my non-negotiable terms she would need to enroll in gambling addiction treatment, agree to financial counseling, provide a signed statement, admitting to the identity theft for the credit agencies, and develop a structured repayment plan for the money she had taken from me. To my surprise, my father called me the next day. Apparently, my grandfather had reached out to him, feeling he should be aware of the situation. Though we had grown apart over the years, he expressed genuine concern and offered financial help to cover some of my immediate expenses. This unexpected support from a parent I had almost written off was both confusing and comforting. Over the next few weeks, I worked systematically to document every unauthorized transaction and fraudulent account. The paper trail was extensive, involving bank statements, credit applications, forged signatures, and the falsified loan documentation. Campus Legal Services helped me submit formal disputes to the three major credit bureaus and provided guidance on navigating the identity theft recovery process. My support network expanded beyond what I could have imagined. Friends organized a fundraiser to help with my tuition gap. A professor who had heard about my situation through the academic intervention program connected me with an emergency grant for students in crisis. Tyler's parents offered me an interest-free loan to be repaid. Whenever possible, no rush. The campus counselor I began seeing weekly helped me process not just the practical aspects of recovery, but the emotional trauma of such a profound betrayal. She helped me understand that my mother's actions reflected her own issues and addictions, not any failure or naivety on my part. This perspective was crucial in beginning to rebuild my self-confidence and trust in my own judgment. The most difficult decision was what to do about my mother legally. The police investigation was proceeding, and they had found substantial evidence supporting my claims. I was told that if I wanted to press forward, there was a strong case for criminal charges. However, knowing about her gambling addiction and the threat she was under complicated my feelings. Was punishment what I wanted, or was accountability and recovery more important? After much reflection and counsel from those I trusted, I decided to pursue a path that required accountability while creating opportunity for rehabilitation. I would continue with the identity theft claims to clear my credit, but I would support my mother entering a diversion program that combined restitution requirements with addiction treatment instead of pursuing the maximum criminal penalties. This decision wasn't easy, and not everyone in my life agreed with it, but it felt right to me, a balance between protecting myself and allowing for the possibility of healing in our family. The most immediate practical decision was completely separating my finances from family connections. I closed every account that had any link to my mother and opened entirely new ones at a different bank. I set up fraud alerts and credit monitoring services. I changed all my passwords and security questions, particularly avoiding information my mother might know. These steps were time-consuming and occasionally frustrating, but each one represented a reclaiming of my financial independence, a rebuilding of the security that had been shattered. Rebuilding after such a profound financial and emotional betrayal wasn't a quick or easy process. I developed a structured recovery plan, breaking down the overwhelming situation into manageable steps. First was addressing my immediate educational needs. I met with financial aid again, this time with documentation of the identity theft and police report. This evidence of extenuating circumstances helped me secure an emergency hardship grant that covered part of my tuition gap. For the remaining balance, I reluctantly took out a student loan, something I had worked for years to avoid. I consoled myself with the knowledge that it was a federal loan with reasonable terms, not the high-interest private loans I had feared. I also created a realistic repayment plan for after graduation, giving myself permission to see this as a necessary investment in my future, rather than a failure of my financial planning. The next priority was finding more sustainable work. My current jobs, while flexible with my student schedule, weren't generating enough income to cover my increased expenses. Through a connection from my economics professor, I interviewed for an internship at a local financial services firm that paid significantly better than my campus jobs. To my surprise and relief, I was offered the position with the potential for it to develop into a full-time role after graduation. This internship proved to be a turning point. Not only did it provide better compensation, but it also aligned with my career goals and offered valuable professional experience. The company was understanding about my academic commitments and allowed me to work around my class schedule. For the first time in months, I felt like my career path was back on track. Housing remained a complicated issue. I had moved in with Tyler out of financial necessity, but our relationship was showing strain under the pressure. After several honest conversations, we agreed that living together had happened too soon and for the wrong reasons. I found a more affordable apartment with two new roommates, fellow students who were also working their way through college. This living situation provided both the financial relief I needed and a fresh social environment away from the constant reminders of my crisis. As the legal and credit issues progressed, I maintained firm boundaries with my mother. She had entered a gambling addiction treatment program as part of her diversion agreement with the prosecutor's office and was attending financial counseling sessions. We communicated primarily through text with occasional supervised visits when my grandfather was present. These boundaries were essential for my healing process, allowing me to engage with her without risking further manipulation or financial entanglement. My relationship with Amber evolved in unexpected ways. Initially, I had worried that my conflict with our mother might drive a wedge between us, but the opposite occurred. Free from our mother's triangulation, we developed a stronger, more honest relationship. She had transferred to a different college than initially planned, one offering better financial aid, and was thriving there. We spoke weekly, supporting each other's independence while maintaining our sisterly bond. My father's re-emergence in my life continued in small but meaningful ways. He couldn't offer substantial financial support due to his obligations to his new family, but he helped with occasional emergency expenses, and more importantly, provided emotional support I hadn't expected. Our relationship was being rebuilt on new terms with a maturity and honesty that hadn't existed before. Despite these positive developments, the healing process wasn't linear. I experienced setbacks and difficult days. The criminal investigation against my mother resulted in a deferred prosecution agreement requiring full restitution and completion of her treatment program. While this was the outcome I had advocated for, seeing the official court documents listing her offenses was emotionally devastating. The formal acknowledgement of her betrayal made it impossible to minimize or deny what had happened, forcing me to fully confront the reality of our damaged relationship. Through all of this, I maintained my determination to graduate. With support from academic advisors, I created a revised plan that would allow me to complete my degree with only a one-semester delay. This compromise felt like a victory given how close I had come to dropping out entirely. My grades gradually improved as my financial situation stabilized, though I never fully regained the perfect GPA I had maintained before the crisis. The day I walked across the stage to receive my diploma was emotionally complex. My grandfather and Amber were there cheering proudly. My father attended with his new wife, an awkward but appreciated gesture. My mother wasn't present, still working through her treatment program, but she had sent a card with a modest check, the first installment of her court-mandated restitution payments. The check represented less than 5% of what she had taken, but it was a concrete acknowledgement of the debt, something more meaningful than her earlier empty promises. That graduation represented more than academic achievement. It symbolized my resilience, my refusal to let betrayal define my future. The journey had been far more difficult than I had ever anticipated, but I had emerged with not just a degree, but with valuable life lessons about boundaries, self-advocacy, and the true meaning of independence. In the months following graduation, I began leading financial literacy workshops at the community center, sharing the hard-earned wisdom from my experience. I focused particularly on young adults establishing their first independent accounts, helping them understand the importance of financial boundaries even with family members. These workshops became a form of therapy for me, transforming my painful experience into valuable guidance for others. The emotional impacts of the betrayal lingered longer than the financial ones. I developed trust issues that affected my relationships, particularly around money matters. Therapy helped me recognize these patterns and work through them gradually. I learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and paralyzing suspicion to trust again, while maintaining healthy boundaries. Today, 3 years after that devastating discovery, I've achieved a level of financial stability I once thought might be permanently beyond my reach. The credit damage has been largely repaired. My career is flourishing, and I've even begun investing again, rebuilding the savings that were stolen. My mother and I have a carefully managed relationship with clear boundaries and expectations. She continues to make small but consistent restitution payments, a tangible reminder of her commitment to making amends. The most profound lesson from this experience has been about the nature of family and independence. Family connections I've learned should enhance our lives and provide support, not serve as channels for exploitation or manipulation. True independence isn't just about managing money well, it's about having the courage to establish and maintain healthy boundaries, even when those boundaries must be drawn against the people we love. If my story resonates with you, if you've experienced financial manipulation from family or friends, please know that recovery is possible. It takes time, support, and tremendous courage, but you can rebuild both financially and emotionally. The path forward begins with a single brave step, acknowledging the betrayal and choosing your own well being. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family members? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it helped you feel less alone in your own journey. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your financial future is worth protecting, even when that means making painful choices.